They say intimidation is a weapon in rock and roll, that the biggest and loudest and most destructive performer owns the stage and forces everyone else into submission. Pete Townshend believed this in 1967. The Who had built their reputation on violence and chaos, on smashing guitars and demolishing equipment, on creating spectacle through destruction that made every performance feel dangerous and unpredictable. When Pete heard that this American guitarist named Jimi Hendrix was being added to the Monterey Pop Festival lineup, added to a bill where The Who was supposed to be the explosive highlight, his response was territorial and aggressive. "They want spectacle," Pete said. "They want someone who destroys guitars and creates chaos. That's our territory. That's what we do better than anyone." It was more than professional rivalry. It was Pete's identity, his innovation, the destruction ritual that had become The Who's signature, and that no other band had successfully copied. But when Pete Townshend smashed his guitar at Monterey trying to intimidate Jimi Hendrix into not performing his own destruction ritual, and when Jimi responded by playing with such focused intensity that 5,000 people sat in complete silence for 3 full minutes after he finished, Pete learned that real power on stage doesn't come from destruction. It comes from creation so overwhelming that nothing else matters. Before we step onto that Monterey stage where 2 approaches to guitar violence collided and one walked away changed forever, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear comes from the people who were there, who watched intimidation fail and genius triumph, who witnessed the moment when Pete Townshend realized that breaking guitars is just theater, but making them sing impossibly is transcendence. June 1967, Monterey, California. The Monterey International Pop Festival is about to become one of the defining moments of the 1960s counterculture. 3 days of music that will introduce American audiences to artists who will shape the next decade of rock and roll. The festival is organized by John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, along with producer Lou Adler, and it's conceived as a non-profit event designed to showcase the best of contemporary music across multiple genres. The lineup includes established acts and newcomers, folk artists and rock bands, American performers and British imports. The goal is to create something that captures the spirit of the moment, the sense that music is becoming more than entertainment, that it's becoming the language of a generation trying to define itself against the values and assumptions of its parents. The Who arrives at Monterey with a reputation that precedes them. They're known in England for their explosive live performances, for Pete Townshend's aggressive guitar playing and his ritual destruction of instruments at the end of shows, for Keith Moon's manic drumming and equipment demolition, for Roger Daltrey's commanding stage presence, for John Entwistle's thunderous bass that provides foundation for the chaos happening around him. The Who's performances are events, spectacles where the line between music and theater blurs, where violence and beauty coexist, where the audience never knows exactly what will happen but knows it will be memorable. Pete Townshend is 22 years old and has developed the guitar-smashing ritual into an art form, a choreographed destruction that looks spontaneous and wild, but that's actually carefully planned to create maximum visual impact while ending the performance on a note of cathartic release. Pete's relationship with guitar destruction is complex. It started accidentally during a performance at a small club where he hit the ceiling with his guitar's headstock and damaged the instrument. Rather than apologize or stop playing, Pete smashed the guitar completely, turning the accident into an intentional act of aggression. The audience's reaction was intense, more excited than they'd been during the actual musical performance, and Pete recognized that destruction could be as powerful as creation in generating emotional response. Over time, he refined the ritual, learned how to smash guitars efficiently, which models broke most dramatically, how to time the destruction for maximum impact. By 1967, Pete's guitar smashing is The Who's signature, the climax that every show builds toward, the moment when controlled musical energy transforms into uncontrolled physical violence against the instruments themselves. When Pete learns that Jimi Hendrix is also on the Monterey lineup and that Jimi has been known to set his guitar on fire as part of his performances, Pete's reaction is territorial and concerned. Setting a guitar on fire is destructive spectacle, exactly the kind of thing that The Who has made their identity, and Pete doesn't want to be upstaged or have his ritual diminished by someone else doing something equally or more dramatic. He complains to the festival organizers, says that only one band should do the destruction ritual, that having 2 acts smashing or burning guitars will make both seem less special, that it's The Who's territory and other acts should respect that. The organizers are caught in an awkward position. Both The Who and Jimi Hendrix are important acts for the festival, and neither wants to change their performance plans. A compromise is suggested. The Who will perform before Jimi, so Pete can smash his guitar first, establishing dominance, and then Jimi can do whatever he wants with his guitar afterward as a response or counterpoint. Pete accepts this arrangement but decides to make his guitar destruction at Monterey more intense than usual, to create a spectacle so impressive that whatever Jimi does afterward will seem like an imitation or a lesser version of what The Who already did. He brings backup guitars specifically for smashing, makes sure the stage crew knows to have replacement instruments ready, plans the destruction sequence to be as violent and complete as possible. In Pete's mind, this is a battle for territory, for ownership of the destruction ritual, for establishing which approach to guitar violence the audience will remember as definitive. What Pete doesn't fully understand is that he's preparing for a battle that Jimi isn't fighting, that Jimi's relationship with his guitar is fundamentally different from Pete's, that destruction isn't the point for Jimi the way it is for Pete, that what Jimi is about to do will make Pete's carefully choreographed violence seem like empty theater. The Who's performance at Monterey takes place on the evening of June 18th. They go on stage to an audience of approximately 5,000 people, many of whom have never seen The Who perform live, who know their records but haven't experienced the intensity and chaos of their stage show. From the first song, The Who is operating at maximum intensity. Pete attacking his guitar with aggressive strumming and power chords, Keith Moon flailing at his drums with barely controlled violence, Roger Daltrey commanding the stage with physical presence and vocal power. The setlist moves through their most energetic songs, building momentum and intensity, the volume pushed to levels that many American audiences haven't experienced, the physicality of the performance more extreme than what most bands bring to festival stages. The audience response is mixed. Some people completely captivated by the aggression and energy, others uncertain whether what they're watching is brilliant or just loud chaos. The performance builds toward its climax. Pete has been telegraphing the coming destruction through his increasingly violent playing, hitting his guitar against his amplifiers, creating feedback, pushing the instrument beyond its normal function. When the final song ends, Pete doesn't just stop playing. He continues attacking his guitar, smashing it against the stage, against his amplifiers, breaking it into pieces while Keith Moon simultaneously demolishes his drum kit, creating a scene of complete destruction that's shocking in its totality. Pete lifts the remains of his guitar over his head and brings it down repeatedly, fragments flying off, strings snapping and whipping through the air, the beautiful instrument transformed into wreckage. The audience reacts with screams and applause, the visceral thrill of watching expensive equipment destroyed, creating excitement that goes beyond what the music itself generated. Pete stands in the wreckage, breathing hard, sweating, satisfied that he's created the most dramatic moment of the festival so far, confident that his dominance of the destruction ritual is now established. Backstage after The Who's performance, Pete is approached by several people who witnessed what he did on stage. Most are impressed, some are disturbed, a few are concerned about whether this kind of destruction is appropriate for a festival that's supposed to be about peace and love and musical community. Pete defends his performance, says that the destruction is art, that it's cathartic, that it represents the rage and frustration of a generation that doesn't have other outlets for those feelings. Someone mentions that Jimi Hendrix is up next, that he's probably reconsidering whether to do his guitar burning ritual after watching Pete's dramatic destruction. Pete smiles, says that imitation is flattery, that if Jimi wants to burn a guitar after Pete smashed one, people will see it as a response rather than an original act. Pete believes he's won the battle for the audience's attention, that his violence was so complete that anything else will seem secondary. Jimi Hendrix takes the stage with the experience around 11 at night. The atmosphere is different from what The Who created. There's anticipation, but also curiosity, uncertainty about what's going to happen, awareness that some kind of confrontation or comparison is about to occur. Jimi is dressed in his characteristic flamboyant style, bright colors and exotic patterns that mark him as operating in a different aesthetic universe than The Who's aggressive mod styling. He picks up his guitar, his white Stratocaster, and begins tuning it carefully, taking time to get everything exactly right, not rushing despite the audience's impatience, treating the instrument with respect and care that contrasts sharply with how Pete just treated his guitar as an object to be destroyed. When Jimi finally starts playing, the first thing the audience notices is that the volume and aggression are not trying to match what The Who did. Jimi is playing with control and precision, not attacking his guitar, but coaxing sounds from it that demonstrate mastery rather than domination. The set list moves through several songs, each one showcasing different aspects of Jimi's playing. He uses feedback not as noise but as melody, controlling the howling sustain and shaping it into musical phrases that have emotional content. He plays behind his back and between his legs not as gimmicks but as natural extensions of his performance, the guitar becoming part of his body rather than an external object. He creates sounds that the audience has never heard before, combinations of distortion and clarity, violence and beauty, chaos and structure that demonstrate complete command of the instrument. The audience's energy shifts from the excited chaos that The Who generated to something more focused and intense, a recognition that what they're watching is not just spectacle but something approaching transcendence, that Jimi is showing them what electric guitar can be when played by someone who understands it completely. The final song of Jimi's set is a performance that becomes one of the most famous moments in rock history. He plays with increasing intensity, building the music to a fever pitch, using every technique he's demonstrated throughout the set, but pushing everything further, making the guitar scream and cry and sing in ways that feel alive and desperate and beautiful. The audience is completely absorbed, 5,000 people focused entirely on what Jimi is doing. The festival atmosphere of casual enjoyment transformed into something more concentrated and serious. And then, when the music reaches its peak, when it feels like the guitar can't produce any more sound or emotion, Jimi does something that nobody expects in quite the form it takes. He kneels on the stage, sets his guitar in front of him, and pulls out lighter fluid and matches. The audience understands what's about to happen, has been told that Jimi sometimes sets his guitar on fire, is prepared for another act of destruction like what Pete did. But what Jimi does is different in ways that matter profoundly. He doesn't smash the guitar first. He doesn't attack it or treat it violently. He continues playing it even as he prepares to burn it, coaxing final sounds from the strings, treating the instrument with respect and even tenderness as he prepares its sacrifice. When he finally lights the guitar on fire, it's not an act of aggression or rage like Pete's destruction was. It's more like a ritual offering, a sacrifice of something valuable. The guitar burning as a gift to the music or to the audience or to something beyond both. The flames consume the guitar while Jimi continues to play it, his hands moving over the burning wood and strings, the combination of music and fire creating an image that's both beautiful and horrifying, creation and destruction happening simultaneously. The audience watches in complete silence, the excited screaming from The Who's destruction replaced by something closer to awe or shock or recognition, that what they're watching means something more than entertainment, that this is a moment that transcends normal performance categories. The fire grows larger, the guitar's structure failing, the music becoming noise and then stopping as the strings snap and the wood splits. Jimi finally releases the burning guitar, lifts the flaming wreckage over his head in an image that photographers capture, and that will become iconic, then smashes what remains against the stage, completing the destruction. And then something remarkable happens. The performance ends. The fire is extinguished by stage crew. Jimi stands and walks off stage, and the audience sits in complete silence. For approximately 3 full minutes, 5,000 people don't applaud, don't scream, don't make any sound at all. Multiple witnesses who were there, including musicians and journalists and photographers, later testified to this extended silence, describing it as one of the strangest and most powerful audience reactions they had ever experienced. The silence wasn't disapproval or confusion. It was something else, a collective recognition that what they just witnessed required time to process, that immediate reaction would be inadequate to what happened, that the only appropriate response was silence while people absorbed what they had seen. Pete Townshend watched Jimi's performance from the side of the stage. Multiple people who were standing near Pete during Jimi's set later described his reactions. At first, Pete watched with the critical eye of a professional evaluating a competitor. But as Jimi's performance continued, as it became clear that what Jimi was doing was operating on a completely different level than guitar destruction as spectacle, Pete's body language changed. His arms, which had been crossed defensively, dropped to his sides. His expression shifted from confident to confused to something that looked like recognition of defeat. By the time Jimi set his guitar on fire, Pete was completely still, watching with what witnesses described as a mixture of admiration and something like grief, as if he was understanding in real time that his entire approach to guitar destruction His signature ritual had just been revealed as theater by someone who made destruction meaningful rather than just exciting. When the 3 minutes of silence finally broke and the audience erupted in applause and screaming that went on for 10 minutes, Pete walked away from the stage area. Friends who found him later backstage said he was sitting alone, not angry or defensive, but quiet and thoughtful, processing what he had just witnessed. Someone asked him what he thought of Jimi's performance. Pete's response, remembered and recounted by multiple people, was honest and raw. He said that watching Jimi made him realize that smashing a guitar is just breaking an object, that what Jimi did was different, that Jimi sacrificed his guitar rather than destroyed it, that there was respect and even love in how Jimi handled the instrument even as he prepared to burn it, that the destruction wasn't the point, it was the conclusion to something larger, the final note in a piece of music that couldn't end any other way. Pete said that his own guitar smashing now seemed hollow to him, seemed like violence for its own sake rather than violence that meant something. He said that he had been trying to intimidate Jimi by destroying his guitar first, by making the destruction so complete that anything else would seem lesser. But what Jimi did wasn't trying to match Pete's destruction or compete with it. Jimi played music that was so good that the destruction became a tragic necessity, the end of something beautiful rather than the climax of aggression. Pete said that the 3 minutes of silence after Jimi's performance said everything that needed to be said, that you don't applaud immediately after witnessing transcendence, that you need time to process what you saw before you can react to it. The photographs and film footage from Monterey captured both performances, preserving them for future audiences who could compare Pete's aggressive destruction with Jimi's sacrificial burning. The contrast is striking when viewed side by side. Pete's destruction is athletic and violent, impressive in its totality, but ultimately focused on the act of destruction itself, the guitar as enemy to be defeated. Jimi's burning is ritualistic and almost gentle despite the flames, the guitar as offering to be sacrificed, the destruction as finale to music rather than as spectacle separate from music. Rock critics and music historians who have analyzed these two performances consistently identify them as representing two fundamentally different approaches to guitar destruction, one treating the instrument as object to be dominated, the other treating it as partner to be released. The impact of Monterey on both Pete Townshend and The Who is documented in interviews and in their subsequent music. Pete continued to smash guitars for years afterward because it was expected and because audiences wanted to see it, but multiple people close to him said that after Monterey, his heart wasn't in the destruction ritual the way it had been before. He talked about wanting to find other ways to end performances, other climaxes that didn't require destroying instruments, other forms of intensity that came from music rather than from theater. Some of The Who's later work shows evidence of this shift, more attention to musical complexity and less reliance on volume and destruction as sources of impact. Whether Pete successfully evolved beyond the destruction ritual is debatable, but the attempt to evolve, the recognition that there were limitations to what destruction could express, came directly from watching Jimi at Monterey. Jimi Hendrix's performance at Monterey is consistently cited as his breakthrough moment in America, the performance that introduced him to a mass audience and established him as more than just a British import or a blues guitarist with flashy techniques. The combination of musical mastery and dramatic spectacle, the way he made destruction meaningful rather than just exciting, created an image and a legend that would define how American audiences understood him for the rest of his brief life. The burning guitar became Jimi's signature visual, reproduced in posters and photographs and described in countless articles, but people who were actually at Monterey always emphasized that the burning was the last minute of a 90-minute display of guitar mastery, that focusing only on the destruction missed the point of what Jimi demonstrated that night. The 3 minutes of silence after Jimi's performance became part of the legend, discussed and analyzed almost as much as the performance itself. Music journalists who were there wrote about the silence as evidence of the audience recognizing they had witnessed something historically significant, something that couldn't be responded to with normal concert reactions. Sociologists and cultural critics use the silence as an example of how rock performances could create moments of collective consciousness, times when individual audience members became part of a larger unified response that no one coordinated but that everyone participated in simultaneously. The silence became proof that Jimi's performance wasn't just entertainment, that it touched something deeper than excitement or enjoyment, that it created an experience that required reflection before reaction. Pete Townshend and Jimi Hendrix developed a relationship of mutual respect after Monterey, performing together occasionally, speaking positively about each other in interviews, acknowledging the influence they had on each other's development as guitarists. But people close to Pete said that he never forgot the lesson of Monterey, that the memory of trying to intimidate Jimi through destruction, and then watching Jimi make destruction meaningful stayed with him, reminded him that innovation in rock music isn't about being the loudest or most aggressive or most destructive, but about finding ways to express something true through the instrument that connects with audiences on levels beyond spectacle. When Jimi died in 1970, Pete was among those who spoke publicly about the loss, describing Jimi as someone who showed that guitar could be more than Pete had imagined, that the instrument's possibilities extended beyond what conventional playing or conventional destruction could achieve. The 5,000 people who sat in silence for 3 minutes after Jimi Hendrix played at Monterey carried that memory for the rest of their lives. In interviews conducted decades later, audience members described the silence as one of their most vivid memories from the entire festival, more memorable than any of the applause or excitement from other performances, more powerful than the collective energy of thousands of people enjoying music together. They described the silence as emerging naturally, not because anyone told them to be quiet or because the performance was disappointing, but because applause felt inadequate, because screaming felt wrong, because the only appropriate response to what they had witnessed was stillness and quiet while they processed the impossible thing they had just seen. When you watch footage of Pete Townshend smashing his guitar at Monterey and then watch footage of Jimi Hendrix burning his guitar, you can see the difference between destruction as spectacle and destruction as sacrifice, between violence that's performed for effect and violence that emerges from musical necessity. Pete's destruction is impressive and memorable, but it's external to the music, a separate act that comes after the songs are finished. Jimi's destruction is integrated into the music, the final notes of a performance that couldn't end any other way. The guitars burning as inevitable conclusion to the intensity that Jimi generated through playing. One is theater, one is transcendence. Both are valid forms of performance, but only one creates silence in 5,000 people who understand they've witnessed something they'll never forget, something that changed their understanding of what music can be and do. The story of Pete Townshend trying to intimidate Jimi Hendrix by smashing his guitar first, and Jimi responding with playing so intense that his destruction became meaningful rather than theatrical, represents one of rock's most important moments of clarity about what real power on stage actually means. Pete learned that night that breaking things is easy, that anyone with enough aggression and enough backup guitars can create spectacle through destruction. But making destruction means something, making it the conclusion to music rather than just the climax to a show. Making 5,000 people sit in complete silence for 3 minutes because they need time to process what they witnessed. That's not intimidation, that's not competition, that's transcendence. And transcendence doesn't need to intimidate anyone, because there's no competition at that level, no battle for territory, just recognition from everyone watching that they're in the presence of something that operates according to rules they don't fully understand, but that they recognize as real and true and more important than anything else happening around them.